Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. If you're live, we're streaming on 4th of July here in the United States. 19. I'm still in the last century, 2021. If you're joining us later, it's whatever day it is. Welcome, welcome. So my theme today, the upside of vulnerability, kind of perhaps a strange theme to be coupled with Independence Day and the freedom and the power that seems to imply, right? The power of that. In a sense, and I think I'm going to let David White's words speak to this. Maybe some of us, maybe this is ringing true for you, the power that we find in the various ways that we've tried to protect ourselves, to protect ourselves. Some of us may be finding that um, that might be illusory or exhausting or not the whole picture for sure. And so what does this have to do with our meditation? The upside of vulnerability, I also had this idea of, especially feeling in my mindfulness of life and when I lose the mindfulness of life and in meditation, what I'm noticing is what is that threshold of where I'm holding on to the habits of mind, the activity of mind, consciously or well, mostly unconsciously or habitually, certainly. We might think of, you might know for yourself the top kinds of ways that your mind stays active while we're practicing meditation. For me, one of them is kind of planning out my lists of things to do. Another is planning how I'm going to. I sit in meditation and I plan how I'm going to sit with you guys, what I'm going to say on Sunday mornings as I'm streaming. Resolving something, acting out some plan in my head of whether it's something coming up on that day or some big event or some decision, something I need to put together. So that's you might have had that assignment before, that homework of noticing what are the top ways that your mind stays active when you're attempting for it to get more quiet or being willing not to force that because you might have noticed that doesn't work. But if attempting to allow the conditions that allow us to let go into that spaciousness and not holding on, not grasping on to the thinking. So what I have noticed also is in that on that threshold is a feeling of vulnerability. It's pretty subtle for me still, and maybe you'll explore this for yourself, or maybe you're sensing, yeah, it's a very feeling vulnerable, as if that threshold into vulnerability, or that threshold here as we sit to release, to not hold on to the thoughts, to let them be, but step back as if we're observing ourselves from the back or above, step into the deeper spaciousness, that there's some tremor of vulnerability. And maybe it's other things too. So let that not be the only prospect, but see what's there for you on that threshold. However, I think vulnerability is a big one of them. So let's see what David White has to say in his book, Consolations, the Solace, Nourishment, and Underlying Meaning of Everyday Words. Vulnerability is not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. The attempt to be invulnerable is the vain attempt to become something we are not, and most especially to close off our understanding of the grief of others. More seriously, in refusing our vulnerability, we refuse the help needed at every turn of our existence and immobilize the essential, tidal, and conversational foundations of our identity. To have a temporary, isolated sense of power over all events and circumstances is a lovely, illusory privilege, and perhaps the prime and most beautifully constructed conceit of being human, and especially of being youthfully human. But it is a privilege that must be surrendered with that same youth, with ill health, with accident, with the loss of loved ones who do not share our untouchable powers. Powers eventually and most emphatically given up as we approach our last breath. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely, as misers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking fully through the door. So that threshold into inhabit vulnerability. Funny. Oh, there he goes. Little Rue sleeping over there, snorting his approval. It's funny. He has a thing about thresholds. As we walk through doors, he always pauses, and I don't know if he had a bad experience getting hit by a door. Anyhow, thresholds. That threshold that you might sense as we sit now in just a moment for our 12 minutes. Where was this? That beginning line, he said, vulnerability is the underlying, ever present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. And so, as we sit today, you might notice that we might be at that threshold where we enter into that larger and more courageous and more compassionate space, into that intimacy with disappearance. And that's partly the rub, or the challenge is there's a sense that the identity we connect ourselves with ourselves, that we know ourselves to be, is about to disappear. And so with that invitation, that exciting invitation, let's ensure that our seat is comfortable. So whatever props you need, you can be sitting or lying down. You can be sitting with your back against some support. And let's begin with a bell and a bow. So as we've been doing together, This practice is not at all about denying our experiences, any of them. And in fact, it includes and needs these experiences to segue, to usher us into this quiet, into that threshold of this stillness, this silence, into that larger essence of ourself. So check for yourself how you feel and find maybe the basic elements of this sitting, the support, what I term ground. How you right now sense the presence, the ground below us, the structure of our body that supports us, the gravity that holds us. And you can always come back to ground. And then we can also open to sound. So we're aware of our what feels to be on the inside as receiving the sounds. We're aware of all that is around us, delivering the sounds. Sound is a code word that includes all that we sense, all that we perceive. And the third pointer that I like to use is breath. Here we can feel and sense into how we can effortlessly receive this ongoing flow of life into our stillness in a relaxed way. So, any of these elements, you might have your own pointers and elements, ground, sound, breath. Just if you find yourself struggling with the practice, you can just come back to any of those tools. These tools that then help us to that step of letting go. It might be helpful to think of yourself of taking a backward step, of seeing yourself as if from behind or above. It might be an image of opening a closed fist. And however many times you sense a grasping or a pushing away, let yourself generously offer forgiveness and open to this moment and celebrate that noticing that is right there, putting us on the threshold into that awakening. Again and again, relaxing and opening. very useful to be alert to the transition, to the ending of our meditation together, to the sound of the bell, to this very distinct shift from one kind of mind state, being state, to the next. And that alertness is kind of like part of inquiry, which is maybe in yoga the practice of self study, um, part of our focusing and attention. And so I'd like to add just in closing that maybe you noticed I didn't say this in the beginning as my focus was on vulnerability and that threshold and that implies sort of a scariness or a reluctance or a hesitation or a resistance. But I have a feeling, I hope actually, because I myself also experience this, is that as we cross that threshold and allow that opening, that we it's also where we experience a vast freedom, perhaps the ultimate freedom. And I believe that's what David White is saying as well. See if I can capture. It's become larger and more courageous and more compassionate. We grow, we grow and mature. So happy Independence Day. Even if it's not that day anymore, let it be an Independence Day. And I think I forgot to say at the beginning, you're on Sun and Moon Yoga Studios YouTube channel. Join us again and again. Check us out at sunandmoonstudio.com. And I'll see you next week. Ciao, ciao.